Welcome, thanks for coming, and nice to see familiar faces here as well. So today we're going to talk about getting to the gut of the matter, and this is a very hot topic as evidenced by everybody showing up today for sure. And I was thinking back on the last couple of years, I don't think I've gone to a conference anywhere where they didn't have something on the gut microbiome. It's a very popular topic, and there's a lot of aspects to it. And so we're going to just kind of touch on the surface of a lot of this material. And I tried to make it as specific to cancer and there's a lot of evidence out there. A lot of it has to do with irritable bowel and other kinds of things. And so we're not going to delve that deep into these other topics. We're really going to stay very cancer focused. But we're also going to talk about kind of going forward, what's a good way to eat to support your whole gut microbiome, okay? And before we sort of jump into things, though, I did want to talk about a couple other classes that are coming up. In a little bit, I'm gonna plug our nutrition services here at the Cancer Resource Center. And we have two of us, actually. I have a wonderful coworker, Greta McCare, who many of you know. She's been here for 10 years, and she's fantastic. And then myself. And we split our time between the campus here and also at Mission Bay. So if you are a UCSF patient with a cancer diagnosis, recent, in the far past, doesn't matter, you are eligible for a consult with either of us. You can just call the number there, and you don't have to be referred, and it's just part of the services here. And then for the general public, though, for the general community, we do workshops like this periodically. And there is one coming up that Greta will be doing in August 23rd, and we think it's going to be a hot topic like this one, which is on calorie restriction and cancer could less be more. So stay tuned for details on that. If you're on our mailing list, you will get information on that. So that will be August 23rd. It's a Wednesday, and that one will be in the evening from 5 to 7. And talking about all of the different concerns, but also potential benefits with calorie restriction during treatment and afterwards. The other thing that's coming up is there is a survivorship wellness series that's brand new, and that will be starting in June, and that will be Mondays. It's 8 weeks, and for that you do have to be a patient at UCSF. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to do a nutrition section. There's going to be psycho-oncology. There's going to be goal setting workshops, how to improve your sleep, so lots of different topics, and I can give you more information on how to get signed up for that if you're interested. So let's get right into it. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about definitions. We're going to do a little bit of schoolwork first and get through a few definitions about the microbiome. We're going to talk about the role of the gut bacteria in relationship to our health in a general way. And then we're going to delve a little bit deeper and get very specific about nutrition and cancer in the microbiome, the role of cancer and other conditions, the role in cancer therapy and treatment, and in cancer risk reduction, and then strategies, because anybody who knows me, I like to get practical, like how do we take this home, what do we do when we get home, and then some key nutrition goals and resources. I always start with this slide, and this is from the American Institute of Cancer Research, and this slide, and they have a wonderful website, by the way, everything on nutrition, specific cancer types, physical activity. But this slide always reminds me of why we do this, why we're all interested in nutrition, because it can really change a lot of things in our bodies and can really thwart carcinogenic processes by eating well. So everything from my favorite, which is apoptosis, so programmed cell death, getting that cancer cell to kill itself off, to helping with some DNA repair, cell differentiation, all of those things. And you'll see as we go through that some of these, you're going to hear these terms again, because there's a role with probiotics and prebiotics also in doing some of these things. And these are the guidelines from the American Institute on Cancer Research and what their recommendations are. And if you've heard Dr. Abrams' talk, he refers to all of these guidelines in his talks as well. But what I wanted to point out is number 10, which is after you're finished with treatment, what you do is you go back to following prevention guidelines. And some of the prevention guidelines, in my view, should include thinking about our gut health. So here's the all of us, this is going to take us back to school a little bit. The microbiome glossary. We all hear about the microbiota. That's just referring to those little bugs that are in your gut, so the microorganisms themselves. The microbiome also includes their genes. So, and we have, you know, many, many more genes in our microbiome than actually human genome. And specifically, it's the community of organisms that live in and on our body and their genes. And then the important thing to think about is this last term, this dysbiosis. That has to do with an imbalance or maladaptation, usually in the gut. Something that's going on that's causing an imbalance. And this becomes important. And then probiotics are these live organisms that, when administered in, you know, adequate amounts, give us a health benefit. And then there are lots of dietary probiotics also. So these are these fermented, selectively fermented ingredients, and that also confer a benefit upon the host. So that the difference, there are cultures that, not all cultures are probiotics, because some of them don't give us that good benefit. So we want the ones that are going to give us a good benefit. I think the bigger part of this is going to be prebiotics. That's going to be the bigger piece of this story. And these are these non-digestible food ingredients that stimulate the growth of the gut bacteria. They feed your gut bacteria. And I'm often thinking about foods and that they're going to feed the bacteria in my gut. And then symbiotics are a combination of the probiotic and prebiotic. And there's a lot of food products out there that are doing that now. And you'll see them on the shelf. They're adding fiber to them. They're adding prebiotics. One of the best symbiotic products is breast milk. It's got the oligosaccharides in it, and it's got the probiotics right in it, the lactobacillus. And so breast milk is like a perfect symbiotic food. So, some of you may know this. On average, how much do the bacteria in your body weigh? B. I heard a B. Other guesses? A, and I heard C. C is correct. 3 to 4 pounds. We have 3 to 4 pounds of bacteria in our gut, which I find amazing. Amazing. So we have over 100 trillion bacteria. I'm not a numbers person, but I get the poundage part. 10,000 species in our body. About 1,000 of those are in our gut. We've got about 600 in our mouths alone. And the bacterial cells outnumber human cells 10 to 1. So we're actually more bacterial than we are human. And our genome contains 100 times more genes. The microbial genome contains 100 times more genes than we have. And again, the 3 to 4 pounds that we have in there. And I love this. I love this. I don't know if you can see this in back, but he's saying, so tell me, Daniel, when will we get to meet your microbes? And that now they're kind of saying that's like another organ in our body that we have to pay attention to. And some of you, I'm sure, have heard of this Human Microbiome Project. This has been going on since about 2008. And they've been really trying to figure out like what's inside of us. And so, and they've been looking at different species, the bacteria, the fungi, the viruses that are in our body, and sequencing the DNA of these. And this is a slide talking about the Human Microbiome Project that says that the human body has all these trillions of cells. And down there at the bottom, the little guy's like, you call this living? Because they're just packed in there. And what they're doing, they're identifying where they are, because what you have in your oral cavity is going to be different than what you have on your skin, for instance, or what you have in your GI tract. They're different depending on the location. So we're still, even though we know a lot, we don't know a lot. So they're still trying to figure out what's on us and how are different people different. Our microbiomes are different from each other, depending on where we're from sometimes. And then they're looking at samples in healthy populations. What's there in people that are healthy? Is there a common microbiome? And then they're also looking at samples from people with diseases. And this is where it sort of gets interesting. So they're taking samples out. Now this isn't to say that the disease, we don't know, which came first, the change in the in the microbiota or the disease. We don't know. So that's some of what we have to find out. And then along came the American Gut Project, and there's also a British Gut Project. So people in Europe can join that one. And this is kind of cool. This is a crowdsourced project. So you can enter your microbiota into this database. You could send it in, they will do some analysis of it, and you get back some information on that. But what's more important is that that becomes this body of data that researchers are using. And so you send in a sample, you take swabs, and then you also send in a stool sample. And I love this here, because you can send in a sample from your doggy if you want. Oh. Why not? And they're looking at, how do we compare to other people? And I think at this point they've got about 6,000 to 7,000 samples now, and they've done all the sequencing on them. And they're finding out some different preliminary findings that, the more different, and I like number 4, the more different types of plants a person eats, the more diverse is going to be their gut microbiome. And we want it to be more diverse. Antibiotic use, this is a surprise to anybody, I'm sure, can really affect the microbiome. And they're finding things like you can have one course of antibiotics and sort of spring back, your gut can kind of come back from that. Repeated antibiotic use, it gets tougher to recover your gut microbiome again. No surprise there. And as we get older, our microbiome gets a little more diverse. So which two do you think best describes our optimal relationship to our gut bacteria? Less is better, the more diverse is better. Foods rich in fiber can improve gut bacteria flora, or limit intake of bacteria to improve health.
B and C.
B and C. You guys are good. Yep, B and C. You guys are good. So we have this whole ecosystem happening in our gut all the time, and it's pretty interesting because there's different species there, and they do interact with each other. So some of them eat the other one's waste. They're all kind of competing with each other. The competition actually becomes important because you want your good bacteria to sort of outcompete pathogens that might be there. And you can increase and decrease population, and they all kind of impact each other. We don't have all the answers yet to this. And also that food sources, acidity, the pH on your body, in your body temperature, all of these things impact the microbiota that you have inside. And small alterations can have massive effects. And what they found that in the last 30 years, though, we've had huge changes in our microbiome and our microbiota. And it's really kind of tracks along with these spikes that we've seen in a lot of these chronic diseases, such as obesity and diabetes and all these different inflammatory kind of bowel diseases. And so this is all happening at the same time. Which came first, right? Why is this important? And a lot of it has to do with that first one. They're regulating and improving our immune function, and we all want that. And also crowding out sort of the harmful bacteria, out-competing them. We want to prevent the growth of those. The third bullet point here, this is going to be very important too, this fermentation of indigestible food, fiber. So fiber is a key thing with all of this. And in your gut, these things will break down and ferment into these short-chain fatty acids, and that turns out to be hugely important for us. There's also production of nutrients like vitamin K, the B vitamins, and then the short-chain fatty acids. Those are the ones like butyrate. It can improve our cholesterol levels, support a healthy weight, on and on. Regulate hormones, improve our mood and mental health, improve our oral health, preserve the mucosal barrier in our gut. This is another one that's really important, keeping the integrity of that lining of your gut, and it can really help in that regard. Preventing chronic diseases, there's a role in irritable bowel syndrome, also in allergies and in atopic dermatitis in infants, and more. If you go to, you're probably seeing all of this out there. There's lists and lists of ways that this helps. Some of it we don't know exactly how. They're looking at the mechanism still. So let's dive into the microbiome and cancer a little bit more, get cancer specific here. We already know that there's a lot of different epidemiological studies that have linked a number of cancers to individual microbes. So we know that HPV, the human papillomavirus in cervical and certain of the oropharyngeal cancers, that's related. We know H. pylori in gastric cancer. We know about Hep C and also Hep B in some of the liver cancers, and then some of the parasites in bladder cancer. And then there's a Salmonella subspecies that might be related to gallbladder cancer. So we know that these different microbes, so these are the ones, we want to sort of outnumber with other things, right? They've done a number of studies now at this point where they've looked at human cancer cell lines, so not specifically in humans, but they've looked at the cell lines, and they've found that a lot of the probiotics possess these, so there's that word again, the apoptosis, we want that, so that they promote apoptosis in gastric and colon cancer cells, and also anti-proliferative types of properties. So the cells aren't going to keep rapidly replicating themselves. So they're finding that some of the probiotics are able to do that in colon cancer and gastric cancer cell lines. And the specific ones that they've looked at were the Lactobacillus GG, and you'll see this a lot on products, and also the LKC and the Bifidobacterium. Those look like those have some anti-tumor activities also in cell lines, so pretty interesting. Now, some of the other studies that are looking at also, and these are in colorectal cancer cell lines also, that there's an underrepresentation of certain types of these bacteria. And it's the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes. And then there's this invasive species, the Fusobacterium species in colorectal cancer. And we don't know what that means exactly yet, but they're underrepresented. And so that looks, there's some association there. We're not sure if that's a cause and effect, but there's an association there. So it's something to kind of stay tuned for. Now you'll know why we went through the glossary in the beginning, right? Dysbiosis, this is my new favorite word. So this is where you get that maladaptation, something going wrong in your gut, right? So this has been linked to cancers of other distant organs like liver and pancreas. And they don't have their own microbiota, but what they're finding is there's this translocation of bacteria, so that the bacteria cells are getting across like the lining in the gut and might be contributing to this inflammation. So that's that whole, we were talking about permeability. You want to really keep your gut nice and healthy, that lining, so that you don't have these bacteria crossing over. So this dysbiosis again, do you think it's good for your gut or bad for your gut? Is it a microbial imbalance? Is it a maladaptation? Or is it all of the above? Yeah. We don't want that. We want happy intestinal bacteria. And there's a couple studies that are showing that actually when you have happy bacteria in your gut, chemo works better. And it really shouldn't be a surprise. That shouldn't be a surprise to us. What they've looked at more specifically is that some of the chemotherapies rely on the ability to mobilize certain bacteria from the intestinal flora, get them to go into the lymph nodes and then trigger an immune response, which is pretty interesting. And then that helps to fight that tumor. And the chemo, one of the chemos they've looked at a lot with this is the Cytotoxin, which is a pretty widely used chemo. And it's pretty interesting because there are side effects from Cytotoxin, the inflammation of the mucosal lining. It turns out in this case, though, that you kind of want that. You want to disrupt that because then these bacteria will pass through the barrier, get into the bloodstream, and stimulate your immune system. So pretty cool how that works like that. So you want to have good bacteria, though, in your gut to do that. And then this is an area that I find really interesting too, the probiotics during radiation. And we talk about this a lot when we're working with people having radiation particularly to the pelvic area. So either cervical or prostate radiation. And it turns out they've done some studies where they randomize patients to either getting a probiotic the week before radiation or not getting a probiotic. And the probiotic is at a pretty, it's Lactobacillus acidophilus, pretty low level, 100 million of those colony forming units. So anybody familiar with probiotics, it's a fairly low level of a probiotic. They got that twice a day, and they had a significant reduction in gas formation. And you know, gas, for one thing, it's just not comfortable for sure. But also what happens if you have gas is body parts move a little bit. So the prostate might slightly get out of position. And so you're not going to get potentially the best impact from your radiation. And so you want to keep that gas in the rectum down as much as possible so that you can get a better result from the radiation. And so that tells me also, though, that if that can help with that, you know, with the gas production and things like that, you know, you might actually feel better too. And then the bigger story, I think, is looking at some of the controlled trials, and there have been quite a few now. And there was a meta-analysis done. That's where you look at a lot of different studies, and they looked at probiotics for the prevention of chemotherapy-induced diarrhea, which is a big problem because sometimes treatment gets delayed or the dosage has to be reduced. So it's not something that you want. In addition, for a dietitian, you know, we get worried about dehydration. How well is the person absorbing? How are they feeling? All of those things. So you really want to reduce the incidence of diarrhea. And it was significant in the probiotic group across this whole meta-analysis of these 9 different controlled studies that they did. And grade 3 and grade 2, that just has to do with like toxicity, number of bouts a day. And what they've also found, and this probably is no surprise to this group, the antibiotic-associated diarrhea is can be reduced. That can be reduced by about 2/3 from probiotics, and it looks like the Saccharomyces and the Lactobacillus GG again were really effective in that. The Saccharomyces is interesting because it's a yeast-derived probiotic. So antibiotics don't wipe it out in the same way that they would a bacteria-derived probiotic. So if you see S, whatever, on the label of your probiotic, that's going to be a yeast. And it survives the antibiotics. And then they've also done studies looking at that chemotherapy can change the gut microbiota, favoring C. diff, so that's not great. And also if you've been on antibiotics, sometimes you're more prone to that possibly. And as we get older, we're more prone to getting C. diff too. And so it's a big problem. And again, the Lactobacillus GG and the Bifidobacterium look like those are really effective in those cases to help with that. And the other thing they're sometimes doing now are actually transplants, fecal transplants and things. We're not going to get into that today, but that's another treatment that's working very well for the C. diff infections. So this is just this is a little bit more of the same, looking at some different studies, less dose reductions related to bowel toxicity, less radiation-induced diarrhea. And the strains, again, the Lactobacillus GG, and then some of these combination products that have the Lactobacillus and the Bifido. Whenever I'm talking about probiotics, I want to see both of those strains on the package. And then this last study is pretty interesting. They looked at bladder cancer recurrence in Japan, and what they found is, and I think it's on the next slide, is this Lactobacillus casei, this Yakult type product. If people were having that up to about 4 times a week, it looked like 4 times a week is where you really got risk reduction for recurrence for bladder cancer. And so that's a pretty interesting, and that's something that commonly is consumed, the drinks, the probiotic drinks. And then the other really good, this VSL number 3, they've done studies with this one as well. This is probably one of the best studied probiotics out there. And it's got about 8 different strains in it, and that's really been shown, and they actually call it a medical food on their website in the higher doses.
Lisa? So that you call, those are those little things that, they have a lot of, they're very, very sweet. So I've avoided them because it seems like you don't know what their content is, but it
Right.
seems like there's a lot of sugar in them.
So there's a light one, I thought it was a slide, the slides later on, it's a blue one, it's light, it has less of it, but still, yeah. But that's what, the study was done in Japan, and that's what, And then this is the study that talked about the lactic acid bacteria and risk reduction of bladder cancer. What I found interesting, it looked like it was a few different things like binding mutagens, inhibiting these enzymes, and also that there's just some kind of food-derived activity in the urine that it sort of shuts down also. And then there's some immunomodulation, so it really helps with the immune system. So there were a number of mechanisms that they were proposing for this. And these were some other studies, and again, the Yakult again, in colorectal cancer. And this study was done for 4 years, and this is what I kind of want to point out. These were longer term, where we get these results. Breast cancer in Japanese women, looking again at some of those same strains, and also soy foods. Inverse association with breast cancer, preventing funny cells in colorectal tumors. These were longer term studies, 4 years, and then the second one since adolescence. So this is a longer term kind of commitment, if you will, to eating these kinds of foods. They did a study for about 3 months with yogurt and breast cancer and didn't find anything in 3 months' time. It may not have been a long enough study. So I bring that up because it's something that, kind of thinking about your lifestyle and eating, it's a longer term commitment than maybe, a few weeks. So which of the following do you think affects your gut microbiome? Antibiotics, getting older, fiber in your diet, how you were birthed, meaning vaginal or cesarean.
All of the above.
All of the above, yep. All of the above. So what we have here is a newborn baby, and how the baby is born makes a big difference. So cesarean tends to get the bacteria that's maybe on mom's skin, versus if the baby goes down through the birth canal, they're going to get more lactobacillus on them. And so there's different studies now looking at that as well. And then if they're breastfed versus some other kind of food, because earlier we were talking about that breast milk has prebiotics and probiotics automatically in it, and there's some reaction with that lactobacillus that's on the baby too, so it's pretty interesting. There are people now that are doing vaginal swabs on the baby after birth if there's studies being done if they're a cesarean, so that they still get the benefit of that good bacteria. And then as we go along, by about age 3, your gut microbiota are kind of set. It's sort of set. But as we go on through childhood, and I read something alarming that something like 10 kids by the time they're age 18 have been prescribed antibiotics between 10 and 20 times. And I remember, ear infections, anybody that has children with ear infections, they're doing that differently now, but when I had screaming baby, I'm going to the pharmacy and didn't really think about those things with my kids. I hate to think about that now. And then as we get older, our gut continues to change. There's more, in older adults, there's more diversity between individuals than there are in younger adults. And there's less diversity in general, and that may be that as we get older, we maybe stay indoors more, because if we go outside, we get sort of dirty out in the outdoors, you get more of these good bacteria into your body. It might be that maybe we're not eating as much fiber food. We're certainly, as we get older, a lot of us eat less than we did when we were younger, so we might just not be getting the diversity of things. This is the part that gets me excited, though. Diet is one of the most important determinants of that diversity in our GI tract. And Again, the breast milk enhancing the lactic acid producing bacteria that the baby got from coming down through the birth canal. And first solid foods, antibiotics. By age 2 or 3, our gut guests have settled in. Our environment affects our microbiome. I have very cute animals in my house, so those are some of the animals that I have. And so apparently, if you grow up with animals, kids have less allergies and things like that too. It's kind of interesting. But you will be more like your dog than the dog is like other dogs in the neighborhood. and I see some people nodding. Anybody who has a dog understands this because they're licking us and we're doing our thing with our dogs. So dietary changes can significantly alter your microbiome in as little as 3 days. So you can get some alteration there, but to get sort of a durable effect, we think you have to go longer than that. And the microbiota can actually influence what you even want to eat. Sometimes they're saying that it can create hunger and cravings and things like that, which is interesting. And might influence taste receptors. None of us have the same microbiome, but we might be more similar to our dog, like I was saying that the dog is to the other dogs. And antibiotics disrupt that, we all know that. The best food for your gut is going to be fiber foods. And here's some of the yummy foods that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. We got through the hard stuff. So part of this is when you're thinking about nutrition, you want to also think about, of course we're all thinking about, ooh, that looks yummy and that looks tasty and all of that. But we also want to think about nourishing the epithelial cells lining our whole GI tract. And if we're not nourishing those good bacteria down there, they will actually eat like the mucus lining your intestines. They'll sort of start eating on that, and you don't want that because that's some of that dysbiosis. So you want to feed these little guys down there. If it can become permeable, and then there can be toxic byproducts that pass through and get into our blood and causing immune responses and inflammation. And they're really thinking that all of this inflammation is very much tied to gut health. And here's a cool little picture that I've literally spent a couple hours just staring at this. And because it kind of tells the whole story. You've got these, good bacteria, bad bacteria. You want the good bacteria to sort of crowd out the bad one. But then they will act on the food that you're eating and create these bioactive food components. And they will also keep these cells tight. So this is inside your intestines here. And so you want to keep this tight. You don't want things getting through necessarily. And then the things that do get through, you want them to be activating your immune system in good ways. And this is the article that I pulled that slide from. And this article gets deeper into that story about these, about fiber and the fermentation of the fiber in the gut. That's really what we want to be doing. We want to be eating fiber-rich foods that are going to ferment in our colon to yield this butyrate, which is one of the short-chain fatty acids. And the other one is this histone deacetylase. The butyrate really helps keep the bacterial growth in check and also reduces inflammation and keeps that gut barrier, the integrity of that gut barrier. And the other compound, the histone deacetylase, it's an inhibitor that suppresses the growth of colorectal cancer cells.
The way that it does that is actually really interesting. So when DNA is wrapped in cells, it's wrapped around proteins called histones. And so there's a number of cancers and carcinogenic things that decrease the stability of the histone, allowing the DNA to unravel and therefore mutate. And so one of the things that histone deacetylase does is it sort of strengthens the histone. It keeps it from being broken down so that the DNA stays nice and tight. Therefore, there's no.
You want to keep the DNA intact.
Yeah, there's no cell growth.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you. And this is a little bit more on the butyrate affecting cancer cells. Decrease in proliferation, that's sort of where those cells just keep, like, how I think of it is they just keep copying themselves over and over and over again. increasing, my favorite thing, apoptosis, programmed cell death, and increasing differentiation. You want cells to be differentiated. You don't want them to be doing something very different. And this goes into, I think this goes a little bit more into some of the mechanisms that you were talking about, Tanisha. So, how much fiber do Americans consume daily, do you think? We need about 25 to 38 grams a day. There are some cultures in the world that eat 100, 150 grams of fiber a day. More hunter-gatherer type societies do that.
Okay.
But how much do you think we eat here? And
Maybe 10, 15 at most.
I think this says 15, but I think it's more like 11. Yeah, not much. And a lot of this, I think we know, is the processed foods that are so abundant in our culture. So, and I love working in the Bay Area and specifically in San Francisco because people, by and large, eat so beautifully here. That, you know, most people are eating very plant-based diets. They're going to the farmer's market. They're eating beans. They're eating all these beautiful vegetables. I get really excited when people are eating vegetables at breakfast. Anybody who knows me knows this about me, and I just like light up when somebody's telling me what they're eating, and it's veggies at breakfast, because that means you're really getting all these wonderful, beautiful plant foods in. So when we're talking about wanting to get 25 to 38 grams of fiber a day, it can be, you know, if you had a nice cup of bean soup at lunch, you're going to get, you know, 16 grams right there. If you're having some nice raspberries on your steel cut oats in the morning, you're going to get another 12 or 13 grams. So it's not that hard to get up to that amount. But when we're relying so much on these processed foods, quick, you know, grab and go type foods, we're not going to get that wonderful intact fiber anymore.
And then also we're talking about insoluble or soluble fiber?
That would be total fiber on these. And then underneath that, it would be broken out into insoluble and soluble fiber. So insoluble, I think of as roughage. It sort of passes through, but it gets down to your lower gut, right? And you want that. You want that to get down to the colon where that bacteria can ferment that and create that short-chain fatty acids, that butyrate down there. So you want some of that good insoluble fiber in your diet to get to the bottom part. When we eat that processed type foods, we're really feeding our upper GI mostly, and nothing's left for the bacteria down lower in your digestive tract. So the fermentable, and this is sort of fiber 101, fermentable fiber that feeds your gut bacteria. So under that you've got this soluble, which would be onions and oats and nuts and apples and fruits and veggies. Those also have some insoluble in them too. Most foods have some of both. And then the resistant starch is another, you might see that term, and that also will get down into your lower gut. So unripe bananas, like green bananas, beans, have some of this. And then if you eat like steel cut oats, that has quite a bit of the resistant starch versus a more processed oat. Or gosh forbid some microwave oats or something like that. It's going to be much more very processed. And then there's non-fermentable, and these give some bulk to the stool and sort of help keep everything moving through. So we do need some of that as well. So the grains and the nuts and the fruits and the vegetables. So most plant foods have some of both. And what to do with that? And then this is another way to kind of think about it, is getting some of these prebiotic foods in. And I think this is the biggest part of this whole story, is eating our prebiotic food sources to really keep feeding the bacteria in our gut. And it's again all of these wonderful plant foods that everybody's eating, but you know, also adding onions and garlic and leeks to what you're cooking, and celery root, and getting some grains in there, and some of the beans and lentils is really important. And then the nuts and seeds are really great. And I'm a big, I push ground flaxseed a lot. Part of it is it can really help. It does a lot of different things. It can actually it can sort of help clear estrogen in your system if that's something that you want to do. And these are just some of the products out there, the ground flaxseed. But it also contains lignans, which is great for your gut bacteria. So eating some of this each day is a great way to get some of those prebiotic food sources into your diet and to feed your gut bacteria.
I sometimes get confused between the pre and probiotic and the like fiber story. So like if you're saying that fiber, you know, you need insoluble and soluble to get it down to feed both your upper and lower GI tract, then how does that relate to prebiotic and probiotic? I mean, are these like prebiotic is broken down into more bacteria,
Well,
and probiotic is already broken down?
The prebiotic are those fiber foods.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That
Those
makes
are those
sense.
fiber foods. And then the probiotic would be the fermented foods. And so, and in some cases, they're going to also have some prebiotic in them as well. If you think of something like a sauerkraut made from cabbage, that's also going to be prebiotic. It's going to still have some of the fiber in it. And then it's also fermented. And so it's going to give you that, that good probiotic that you need to keep replenishing your gut with. When you're looking for fermented foods, and these are some examples and there's more out there, yogurt, buttermilk, kefir, you want to make sure that that says like live and active cultures. And so when you're looking, you want to make sure that it says that on it. And this one says 10 live and active cultures, this brand of kefir or kefir. And then the yogurts should say that on there as well. If you make your own, then you know you're getting it in there. Sauerkraut kimchis, if they've been processed like canned sauerkraut or jarred sauerkraut, may not have it in there because it's been heat processed. Does that make sense? Okay. So you wanna get one that's maybe a fresh product. Same with the pickles and pickled beets and some of the other things as well.
How much fermented food would you suggest we eat on a daily basis?
Good question. How much to eat every day? Amounts, I'm not sure, but just try. I usually say eat fermented foods daily, so maybe a cup of yogurt each day. I've started making sauerkraut, and it's actually quite easy to make. And I make my own yogurt also. It's somehow, I think, I take some starter from the last batch and I put it into the next. So I'm kind of thinking that each time it's getting a little more potent, but I don't know that for sure.
Probably.
And a lot of, yeah.
Can those live active cultures like die if you don't eat it within a certain period of time?
It depends how it's stored, I think. If you ask the yogurt, and I've done this, I've tried calling up the different yogurt companies and actually asking them what's in there, and they won't really say, because of that, the shelf life, who knows how long. But I think over time, they probably do peter out. In general, what they say is a cup of yogurt will give you about 1 billion colony-forming units of probiotics. Yeah. The other one, I tried making sauerkraut back in February when I was getting ready to do this presentation, and I pulled up online a recipe for sauerkraut because somebody told me how easy it is. And some of you are shaking your head. Some of you are already doing this. It turned out to be the easiest thing ever, and it was absolutely delicious. And you just chop up, the cabbage or whatever you're using, and you salt it, and then you kind of massage it to get the fluid. You break down the cells, and there's lactobacillus in it that then begins to ferment with the sugars in the cabbage, naturally occurring sugars in the cabbage. And I had to put a little water with mine. I couldn't get enough water out of it, but just keep it submerged, and you set it on your counter for a few days, and it just sits there and it just bubbles away. And it was delicious. It was probably the best sauerkraut I've ever had. It was really quite different than the sauerkraut that I grew up with, out of the can. Quite different. So quite delicious. And these are just more of the probiotic health benefits, and we've talked about a lot of these already, but lots of different benefits to them. And these are, kimchi is another one of these wonderful fermented foods. So when you're looking for the food sources, check the package, make sure it says live or active cultures. If it's been heat treated, filtered, to improve the shelf life, it may not have those live cultures much in it. You could try making your own, or go to Rainbow. That's a great suggestion. And these are just, and now we get into the supplement part. And general uses, so where this might be helpful, if you're traveling, for instance, it might be nice to take a probiotic along with you in case you start having some GI issues while you're traveling. The traveler's diarrhea type things, irritable bowel, constipation, diarrhea. You see the ulcerative colitis, it can be helpful. Antibiotic-associated diarrhea for sure, infectious diarrhea. So all of those things. When you're looking, and this is one of the side effects, sometimes people will have a lot of symptoms of gas and bloating when they first start. So sometimes it's better to start with a lower amount and sort of titrate up with it. The VSL number 3 product, one of the ones that you can order has actually 450 billion colony forming units in it. That's a very high dose. I usually recommend that people start somewhere around 10 billion. So it's a very high amount initially for some people to start off with, but it works very, very well. If somebody's critically ill, severely immune compromised, the Saccharomyces one that I had mentioned earlier might be something to think about avoiding. And what they're talking about there is a central line, and I think the issue there, somebody had touched the supplement and then maybe touched the portacath, and there was an introduction of the yeast probiotic into the central line. And then some of the lactose fermenting probiotics, if somebody's allergic to milk proteins, they might want to be careful about some of those, like the lactobacilli and the bifidobacterium. And it's also controversial if somebody's got a small intestinal bowel overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth in their bowels. So that's a little controversial. Some say it can be really helpful, some say maybe not a good idea. And that would be something to definitely, you know, go over with your GI doc or oncologist. Refrigerated products may be preferred, and you'd want to look for several different strains in the product, and maybe one of the Saccharomyces also, and then somewhere between 10 and 100 billion of these colony forming units. Now there was one study where they looked at a lot of these different products, and that only like 1 out of 8 actually had these probiotics in the product, and so it's a little bit buyer beware. But some of the brands that we feel are reputable, and we've gone on Consumer Reports and looked them up, are things like Culturelle, VSL number 3. Both of those are studied pretty well. They've used those. Thank you. Nice to see you. Natron, Claire Labs, Jarrow, those products seem pretty good. Renew Life and BioK Plus. And there's others as well. There's others as well that are good. If you're taking an antibiotic and a probiotic at the same time, you might want to separate those. I used to think, why bother taking it if you're on an antibiotic? But apparently some of it will survive through, but you want to give it a couple hours. Or maybe if you're taking one in the morning, take the other at night. And then the other thing to think about is one of the Saccharomyces, like the Florastor, because that will survive the antibiotic. Switch up brands periodically. One recommendation, I've been to a lot of these talks myself too, and somebody was saying maybe try one for a month. You know, see if you're getting the benefits that you want from it. See if it's helping, and then if not, try a different brand.
So how do you know if you're getting the benefit?
Well, if you were taking it for maybe irritable bowel, that's a good question. Are you getting the benefit? I mean, in terms of other things, prevention of other things,
Yeah, it's
you
hard to know.
won't necessarily know. Yeah. And in that case, I would say take one that has several different strains in it, and up over that 10 billion.
Okay.
You'd want to check the use by date. Make sure that you're storing it. If it's a refrigerated product, you want to keep it in the refrigerator. If you're traveling, there are a lot that are shelf stable that you could take with you. And one of the other warnings, if you will, is, you know, if you're pregnant or if you're going to give it to a child or an infant, to really check with the doctor first on that. And these are some of the different strains, and this is going to be really, I apologize, this is going to be small on your little slides there that we printed out, but anybody who wants the slides, just give me your email on the sheet and I'll make sure that you get them. But this kind of tells what the different strains can potentially do. So if there's a certain kind of issue that you're having, that you're looking for some relief from, you can look for some of those strains in the products. And then that leads into this really. Probiotics is big business, and this is a digestive support probiotic for cats. So it's big business when they have it for the pets. And then these are just some examples of kind of what we were talking about, looking for many different strains maybe. I mean, we're sort of, you know, doing a broad spectrum kind of thing, but looking for, this has some of the, it has the Lactobacillus RR on there, and some of the bifidobacterium on there. And this one does as well, so many different strains, and then you'll want to see how much is in it as well. It should say on the front if it's 10 billion colony forming units or 50 or however many is in it, that FOS there, yeah.
You can get this over the counter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So what to do? Now we're all like, what do we do, right? So I'm going back to prebiotic foods again because I feel like that's where we can make some inroads here for ourselves. And somebody had said this earlier about whole foods. And absolutely, eat whole foods. Aim for more than 30 different plant species weekly. And that's kind of fun to do, to kind of think about, did I get 30 different plants in this week? I have people that will describe a salad to me that will have like arugula and kale and spinach and chicory and then red peppers, and there's several right there in just the salad. So try to aim for more than 30 species a week of different kinds of plants.
Is it okay if you eat? So I follow the diet, but I've kind of gotten regimented with the good gut stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's overwhelming to keep adding and reintroducing new things. So I tend to have very similar things daily. Is that okay?
It's probably okay. If you can mix it up a little bit though, maybe seasonally throw in a couple different things. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you will be getting some variety. The other thing that you get when you're eating different kinds of things, there is some, they're kind of team players. You get some symbiosis between different things. So if you're going to eat, for instance, berries, have a couple different kinds of berries at the same time.
I usually
Yeah.
Because I had also read that somebody said, some nutritionist said about alternating greens. So 1 week have spinach, the next week have kale, the next
That's a
week
great
have
way to do it.
else.
Yeah. Arugula 1 week, kale 1 week, spinach 1 week. This isn't as much related to probiotics, but I do sort of push cruciferous veggies a lot. So I want everybody eating something cruciferous every day. So that's your kale, arugula, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kinds of things, bok choy, radish. There's a few others in there. And then we want to eat the prebiotic foods also, because you want to nourish, right? You want to be like, I'm feeding you down there. Here it comes. And so the foods that nourish that good bacteria, onions. So whenever you're cooking, and I know a lot of people do this, start with your onions and your garlic, and you're really already starting off really well. And then, artichokes are great. The Jerusalem artichokes, the asparagus, the again, my favorite, the ground flaxseed, getting that in there. And then really limiting processed foods because, again, they're just low in nutrients. They're going to be high in added sugar. And all of that kind of can reduce that diversity in your gut.
Hello? Why do we say limit? Why don't we just say don't eat any? Why not?
You could say don't eat that. I still like to have birthday cake.
Yeah.
And slice of coconut cream pie for my dad's birthday the other day. So yeah, you could. I mean, it's probably better to really just eliminate it if you can. I'm not quite that disciplined. So I try to attach it though to a healthy meal. You don't want it to displace other things, that's for sure.
There's a lot of birthdays in a year though.
There are a lot of birthdays in a year. Yeah. Including the fermented foods daily would be really important to do. I'm sorry, there's a question. So you do want to aim for that 25 to 38 or more grams of fiber a day, soluble and the insoluble fiber sources that are all listed there. Some of those are on both lists because they have both. Aim for 5 grams a day of the prebiotic foods in your diet. So again, if you get the ground flaxseed in there, you're going to meet that. And you want the whole food sources. You're going to see a lot of these things on the food labels now if you're buying any of the processed foods. And like the Fiber One products, for instance, add a lot of inulin into them. Well, we don't know if inulin is the end-all be-all. There's other things too. And in my experience, I've had people eating a lot of those products and they're really having a lot of GI problems too. It's like makes them really gassy, bloated. So the products, the food manufacturers, they're going to put all those things in there because they want us to buy them. But going back to those whole foods and probably no processed foods would be the way to go. So this is an example of fiber found in nature. And here's how ridiculous it's getting.
Oh my god.
There's fiber in Splenda now. So you
I have fiber in it.
1 gram of fiber in a packet of
But it
Splenda.
says 12 grams in the. Yeah, it doesn't. The average American misses 12 grams of fiber.
Oh yeah, so this is
Not
how
even
you're
fiber.
missing 12 grams of fiber.
So you're gonna have
You
a
need
gram.
like 12 packets of Splenda a day. No, you don't. Don't do this. So what to do? So you want to choose these complex carbohydrates and fermentable plant fibers. So some of the ways that you can do that to get this fermentation kind of going in your gut is if you are going to have pasta, have it al dente. There's some wisdom to that because it's going to give you a little bit more for your lower GI. The steel cut oats versus rolled oats, quite different in terms of just having more of that fiber available for your lower gut. If they take like 45 minutes to cook, you can make a big batch and sort of put them in your fridge and have them for a few days. That's kind of what I finally figured out I could do that versus trying to cook them all the time. Raw or lightly cooked veggies versus if you cook the heck out of them. And underripe bananas might be, and then consider kind of dirtying up your life a little bit. Get outdoors, get in the dirt a little bit if you've got a garden or that. And really, and I think most of us are hip to this now, take antibiotics when necessary for sure, but not for every little symptom that comes along. And then here's the question about the organics. So what about organics? When we're talking about eating more of these plant foods and everything, by all means, if you can, and this is the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. Has everybody heard of this at this point?
Yes.
Pretty much? Okay. So if you get the Dirty Dozen organic, you're going to avoid about 90% of pesticides in food because they're really pretty much concentrated in those top 12 there. And so if you can't buy everything organic, by all means do try to buy those organic. The pesticides do seem that dysbiosis in the gut, they seem to contribute to that. So we don't want a lot of the pesticides, our gut doesn't like it, for one thing. And then there's also quite a bit of information out there now that actually the organic foods are probably more nutritious as well. And then there's the political side of it and sort of protecting people that are working in agriculture as well, which I think is important. And then Clean 15, these have a lower, it's very negligible or doesn't seem to matter. So my asparagus I can buy organic or conventional and it's going to be okay. Does that answer what you were asking about organics?
Yes.
Okay.
May I have one thing?
Mhm.
So, Dr. Abrams, who integrative oncologist at Osher, so when I had my session with him, he said the importance of having organic is that when you have an organic plant, they create chemicals so they can survive in their environment. So when you eat those plants, you're getting those chemicals to help clean and garden your environment. So that's, to me, is a huge selling point of having organic.
Yeah, good point. And the phytonutrients that are going to be there more. The other thing, if you are forcing something to grow rapidly, like they've looked at apples, nutrient content of apples, you're forcing it and you get this big, beautiful apple. But the nutrient content is very much diluted down because it's just get produced so quickly. And it's not fighting off those pests and things too. Yeah.
I was going to point out that EWG, which stands for Environmental Working Group, puts out this list every year, and they have a great website. And I know some of the doctors and scientists that do research with them. It's like independent from any industry influence, which is great. It's hard to find transparency sometimes when you're getting information.
Yeah. No, I like their website a lot, Environmental Working Group. If you can get lost in their website for hours.
Yes.
So just warning you, if you start looking at that website, just expect to be there for a while. And they have lots of different things. They have a seafood section. I mean, pots and pans, all kinds of cool information on their website. And I think they have an office in, cosmetics. They have an office in Oakland, I think, too. Yeah. So what to do? We need to follow a Big Mac diet. And this isn't what you think. This is just sort of a fun thing that Greta had found, and I wanted to include it here. Big Mac stands for microbiota accessible carbohydrates. And so again, the average American consumes about 15 grams of fiber a day. Other people more like 100 to 150. So quite a bit different. So how do you eat more of these Big Mac foods? These are the ones that are, again, these are going to start looking familiar. These good bacteria promoting foods are beans again, or whole grains. bulbs. Those have a natural source of that inulin that the food company is putting into the Fiber One products, but you can get it naturally from eating bulbs. Fruits, nuts, and seeds, so sprinkling chia seeds and sesame seeds and sunflower seeds on things that you're eating. And then dark chocolate has some of this. That makes me happy, but it has to be greater than 70% dark chocolate.
Or cacao nibs.
And then I know that a lot of us are sort of grain adverse. We're really worried about carbs and things. But I just want to talk about whole grains a little bit again. What you're getting, so the bran is still on the whole grain. You're getting the germ, and that's where a lot of like your vitamin E, for instance, is. But what you really get in like the processed foods is just this starchy endosperm part, and that doesn't do much for your gut. It'll feed like your upper part of your gut. But the other things, the bran is that insoluble fiber that will go down to the bottom of your gut, and the germ is going to give you other nutrients. So really you want that whole grain. Finding whole grains, this is, for some people this gets a little bit tricky. You look at the store shelves and look at that wonderful Eggo, whole wheat it says, so. But when you look at the ingredients, and this is where you can really get the story, you want the first ingredient to say whole grain or sprouted. You want to see whole or sprouted. This enriched flour, even though it says wheat flour, that's white flour, even though it says wheat flour. So it has to say whole or sprouted. And this is a sample meal plan, a sample microbiome meal plan. And what we looked at is the breakfast then has that steel cut oatmeal, right, with the resistant starch to get down to the bottom part of your GI tract. It's got some nice walnuts in there. I've stirred in the ground flaxseed, the cinnamon to make it taste sweet without having to add all the added sugar. And then the cinnamon's a spice that's good for you. Mixed berries and then some green tea. The lunch would be kale salad with your nuts and seeds. You could put some lentils in there for protein or a free-range chicken breast, avocado, olive oil, turmeric. You do always want to have you want to have some healthy fat with your plant foods because you're going to absorb them better. That optimizes the absorption. So you do want some healthy fat. That's why the avocado and olive oil are there. And then dinner would be, baked tempeh or a wild caught fish, quinoa cooked with herbs and garlic and onions to get all those probiotic things in there, roasted broccoli, Brussels sprouts. And then for snacks, almonds, apple or hummus with raw veggies. And then yogurt again would be potentially another one of those fermented foods. So we're getting the pickled beets in there, we're getting the yogurt in there for the fermented foods. So this is sort of the healthy diet for building your microbiota. Balance your intake and daily activity to stay at a nice healthy weight. Consume fermented foods daily. Eat plant-based balanced diet, lots of colorful fruits and vegetables. Really aiming for about 4 to 5 cups a day. So, at a couple of your meals a day, try to have 2 or more veggies. And if you do it at breakfast, you get bonus points, as far as I'm concerned. Use herbs and spices liberally, because those are going to be really great for you as well. And have a lot of those phytonutrients as well. Fruits and veggies, beans, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocados. I like to see healthy fat again in each of the meals too for absorption. And then here's the avoid word. There we are. Avoid the processed and refined grains, flours, and sugars, and keeping the white stuff off the plate. Not cauliflower though, we want that there.
What about other oils besides olive oil, like sesame oil or?
Yeah. A lot of those are fine too. Sesame oil. In fact, I use sesame oil and macadamia nut oil a lot because it can really flavor up your dishes without maybe having to put so much salt type stuff like shoyu or whatever on it. So it can really be delicious. And I think that holds up pretty nicely to high heat as well. Yeah. And then limiting the red meat and full fat dairy products. Avoid processed meats. So those are, hot dogs, pepperoni, all of that, salami. Fermented dairy is likely beneficial. Yeah. And then cold water fish is a good source of the omega-3s. Keeping your fluids up daily. And we think probably that the green tea, the black tea, the white tea, all the teas are very good for us. Limiting alcohol. And I didn't get into alcohol much, but that does change your gut microbiome in not a good way, as it turns out. And so they're really looking at that permeability also of the gut with alcohol. So you want to kind of keep that to either limit or eliminate it. In terms of cancer risk reduction, so we're switching a little bit. Looks like coffee might play a positive role in reducing risk of certain cancer types. Occurrence or recurrence, and some of the data in regards to colon cancer, and then what I've read is some on liver cancers. But higher amounts, and it's brewed coffee. So like pour over drip coffee versus like espresso. And they're not sure why. And what I had heard in terms of liver cancer is more like 6 or 7 cups of
it's
coffee
a
a
huge
day.
amount of coffee.
Yeah. So I mean, there are phytonutrients in coffee too. So,
Yeah.
and then a lot of the evidence had been on green tea and white tea being beneficial for certain cancer types. But then when I really took a deeper dive into looking at bladder cancer, it turned out that the black tea looked like that was quite helpful in terms of recurrence too. So mix it up, I guess, is the message. And if you enjoy your coffee, what I look at is what is somebody putting in in the coffee potentially.
Right.
Or if the other thing is somebody's maybe going through treatment where their insides aren't feeling great, coffee might just not settle very well. Yeah. So, and then adequate vitamin D looks like that's beneficial. And then if you're in treatment, you want to, kind of modify your diet as needed. So we all want to eat as healthy as we can, but if you're going through chemo, if you're going through radiation, sometimes we do modify things substantially. And sometimes we might be recommending things that don't seem to be consistent with a, quote, healthy diet, but it's really to sort of get through that phase of treatment. If somebody's having nausea, if they're having a lot of GI problems, we might actually recommend maybe a lower fiber diet if somebody's having a lot of GI problems, for instance. It just kind of depends. So you want to stock your refrigerator. I clearly spend more time on the internet than I should.
Why is there a flag?
I know. There's a flag in there. And the pizza. People put pictures of the refrigerators on the other there.
That's
so weird.
I think it's saying reflective of the American.
Yeah, exactly. Typical American diet.
Sadly.
And then, definitely you want to see all the yummy things on the right in your fridge. And then, all the yummy things in your pantry too, and spices and everything.
One on the left doesn't look that organized.
Can't even eat it all.
But okay.
Doesn't look organized.
No, it doesn't look as disorganized as I would think, but maybe it's just the stuff on the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the glass containers. If you look on the Environmental Working Group website, I guarantee you'll throw away all your plastic after you look on that website.
If you've had a portion of your colon removed, now you have less microbiome. So are there specific things? I mean, because I know from med school that the left and the right colon do different things, right? So I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I don't think we know enough yet to make recommendations, so I'm sort of general with it. Keep eating as much as you can, all the different variety of foods, and trying to eat the resistant ones that will get down into the part of the gut that's still remaining. Yeah. That's a really great question. I think that'd be interesting. I'm always looking at what's absorbed in those areas too. We know more about that.
Yeah.
We know more about that versus what resides there, and that's why this whole American Gut Project, I think, is so important. So, if you're inclined to join that, I think it's $99, and they send you a kit, and then you send in all your samples, and so kind of cool, and then you're part of that data set that then researchers can be looking at.
Certainly might help.
Yeah.
Question. Early on, when you were talking about the ecosystem of the microbiome, someplace in one of them it talks about the food temperature. What does that?
Oh,
was
that's
that
really
about
good.
whether you're eating hot or cold food, or is it your own body temperature? What was
That's
that
a good question about
reference?
temperature of food, and part of why they think our gut, this whole change over the last 30 years, we're cooking the heck out of things too, where our ancestors maybe didn't as much, and so that makes a difference because we're killing off a lot of these natural kinds of bacteria and things that are on food. That's part of it. We're making everything so sterile. That's part of it too. Yeah. So, cooking things less is probably beneficial. Yeah. Good question.
Hi, are there any studies about the stomach
and there was a couple little references in there to certain strains that look like are helpful for gastric cancers, stomach cancers. Right. Part of the, you've got this acidic environment, which actually looks like it's beneficial in a way for probiotics, but also people that maybe take a probiotic that they want to make sure it gets down into the gut, that you might get an enteric coated one or something like that. But there are some studies, earlier there was couple slides on the stomach cancer and talking about specific strains. Yeah, I think that, and I think they're looking, a lot of it is at cell lines though versus human studies at this point.
A couple times you talked about as people get older, the microbiome is more diverse. Did I understand that? Did you mean within an individual or across the population?
Across the population,
Okay.
yeah.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, they think some of it has to do with maybe we're limiting some of the foods that we're eating and eating less fibrous food, maybe not being outdoors as much.
Right, no, I got all that.
I know there's like,
Okay.
we have less acid in our, we have less acid. I think that that's part of it too. As we age, we have less acid available for kind of breaking things down. Yeah. If you're a patient of UCSF and you have, and you're under the cancer center, or if you're being seen by an oncologist here, you can just call the number and you can make an individual appointment with either Greta or myself. We're here at Mount Zion and we're also at Mission Bay. And so we do have access to we would have access to your record here. And we would look at that, we'd look at your labs, and do kind of a nutrition assessment on you and come up with some individualized goals. Yeah, and sometimes people come in with specific questions, or sometimes they're just going through something, or certainly we also prioritize. We cover certain, like the head and neck cancer patients that are going through concurrent chemoradiation. We try to pretty much see all of them, to tell you the truth. So there's certain, cases where we're really trying to see people. But then we also have other appointments that are open, and no charge. It's just part of the services that are provided. Yeah. How aging affects needs? Good question. So in general, this is very general, as we age, we need more nutrients. We need more B12. We need, it's looking like we probably need a little bit more protein, lots of different things. The challenge is we need less calories. So it's sort of, I always think of every bite has to count as we get older. Got to make sure things are very nutrient dense. And I think that the case might be true, and I'm just kind of conjecting here that probably then really focusing on keeping the good gut bacteria in order and feeding that good gut bacteria is really helpful too, because we do have more GI things too as we get older, and less acid to absorb things. So I think it all gets a little more challenging. In terms of the microbiome though, I think what they're finding in that human microbiome, they were saying that as we get older, we become a little bit more individualized, so we're different than somebody else, but narrower, maybe less species growing within us. And we might be narrowing, I think people maybe narrow their diet, they're maybe not eating the whole foods as I don't know.
Medications.
Could be medications, yeah. So I don't know that we know a lot yet. That's still one of those areas where we need to know more about that. But in general, you have to kind of make and I say me because I'm getting there, every bite has to count as we get older, yeah. Okay.
Oh, so is there any study about a gluten-free diet and the probiotics in it, or is there?
There are, yeah, they're looking at that, definitely. All the different kinds of, and I didn't go a lot into like the irritable bowel stuff, but there's a lot of information out there on that, lots and lots, yeah. That's probably where the whole probiotic story is most well developed, is in like the different like irritable bowel syndrome, celiac, some of the other things, sensitivities in the gut, yeah. So you'll find a lot of studies on that, yeah.
This probiotic thing have a connection with the gut leaking?
Leaky gut? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And not just leaky gut, but it can be like, there can be leaking all over in the body. I mean, there are even leaky blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
Yeah. And that has to do with that dysbiosis, so we want to keep that, that intestinal lining for sure intact and healthy. So feeding it and not letting it sort of eat itself, I guess, for lack of a better way to, yeah. But there's quite a bit on leaky gut, yeah.
I was just about juicing.
Yeah, I think it's the same. You want to put a variety of things into that juice if you're going to juice. I prefer, maybe blenderizing something instead because you're going to get the fiber. And then the other thing with that is if you're just having the juice, you're having a smoothie or something like that on an empty stomach, do make sure there's a fat source in it. So a lot of time with the juices there isn't. So blending in maybe some avocado or a little bit of olive oil even, or ground flaxseed,
Coconut
something,
oil.
something so that you get a little fat in there so that they're really their uptake of all those phytonutrients in the juice, you want to maximize that. Yeah. Some of the things will bind up, some of the plant foods will bind up your calcium too and make it that you can't absorb calcium. So you don't want to, take a bushel of kale and juice that, or probably, yeah.
So does a child that was born via C-section, do they eventually develop a healthy bio?
I don't know that we know. It's different. It is different. Yeah. So that's why they're doing a study
to enhance that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've looked into that a little bit because one of my kids was a C-section and the other was vaginal. And so I've looked into that a lot, actually. I think about, those are the kinds of things I obsess about at times. And so looking at fermented foods and whole foods and all of that, just trying to enhance the diet as much as you can. They are doing studies now, though, where they will take like a vaginal swab and then swab the baby after it's born by C-section just to get all of that. But that wasn't something that was done, at least to my knowledge, when my kids were coming into this world. Yeah. I think, you do the best you can.
So if a C-section baby is breastfed, then that helps?
It does help, but they still didn't get that initial bath sort of in the lactobacilli, and that interacts with the breast milk. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, so there's it's like the symbiosis happens there, yeah. But they definitely get, all the immunoglobulins and all of that from the breast milk, for sure, yeah. Good question.
Do you have some good websites for recipes that you like to go
So
for?
on our, the questions about recipes, our Cancer Resource Center does have recipes on it, and I think you've looked at those.
Yeah.
And so for other people who haven't, and you can scroll through it by, either look at all the recipes or by category, so there's some great recipes there. I think Rebecca Katz's website has a lot of nice recipes.
She does, and you can also, so I signed up, so I have her books, so I have her books, but also signed up for her course.
The Cancer Fighting Kitchen course that she's doing.
Which is great. I think it's about $99 or something. You can go in and kind of goes through a whole bunch of things as well as recipes.
Well, let's take a demonstration, like a kitchen demonstration.
I did too, but this is separate. This is like an online resource.
Okay.
With what to, shopping lists, things to cook, menu ideas. So it takes a lot of what she's created in the books and she puts it online.
A friend of mine who's an RN said that she had learned about juicing, that there's supposed to be something about the act of actually chewing the food that engages an enzyme and gives you the most health benefit. So I was enjoying getting all the greens with juicing without having to
chew it all.
Word.
Yeah.
And she goes, I hate to break the news to you.
Well, I think, so digestion starts in the mouth. You have amylase, which starts breaking, that's in the saliva, and it starts breaking down food. So there's probably something to that. My main thing is I still want it to be absorbed better, so I want to make sure there's a little bit of fat source with it, or drink the juice with a meal that has some fat in it, just to optimize the absorption. I think there is something about chewing, though, probably.
Yeah, because I was trying to do those for a while, and I put call it the kitchen sink. Because I put like everything in it. But I found that with all the fresh fruit that's out now, and combining it with nuts and seeds and other stuff, it's I get more filled.
Yeah, you are going to have more satiety.
Yeah, I don't get
from
it
the
from
fiber.
the smoothie.
Yeah.
So I just would prefer. I notice I prefer eating it. I don't use smoothies as much anymore.
And you're going to get more satiety from it, more of the that fiber also. We want the fiber. That's why I don't push juicing actually because of the loss of the fiber. Unless somebody puts it back in, and people do that. I think the food looks so pretty. I just want to eat the pretty food.
Yeah.
One trick I do for kale that I really like is you can like massage it, so you basically cut it raw, you know, and then put a little bit of olive oil, salt, lemon juice. And it makes it easier to chew because I find it very tough.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about it is it will last in the fridge like a week.
Or baking. That's a good one.
I got here a little late, but I was looking over at the slide, and early on, there was a slide that says 2 best ways to describe our optimal relationship to gut bacteria, and then you say limit intake of bacteria to improve health.
So more is better, actually.
Yeah.
And more diverse is better. So the answer is B and C both.
Okay.
Yeah, you want the foods rich in fiber to improve the gut.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have another website to recommend that somebody just turned me on to for if you want recipes and more about food. It's called eat2beat.org.
Oh, great.
It's Eat to Beat Cancer, and there's a lot of, I think it's a lot of vegetarian, a lot of plant-based.
Nice.
What's it called again?
Eat2beat.org. So it's Eat to Beat Cancer, but it's just eat2beat.org.
Eat2beat.org.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, there's a lot out there. Yeah.
This is an easy one. Talk about the bananas. Green, that's the first I've heard of it. How did that fly by me? So green bananas are a good thing? How green, and
Yeah.
are overripe bananas bad for you?
No, they're not bad for you. The thinking is that the green bananas in are a little bit maybe, you're going to have more resistant starch in them that's going to get down to the bottom part of your gut if you're eating green bananas. Yeah.
What do you mean by green? Really green, or just half and half?
Yeah, probably half and half. Yeah.
I just haven't
The
heard
really
this
green
one
ones are hard to
before.
peel.
Yeah,
They're a
they're
little tough. Yeah. And yeah.
Plantains.
Maybe plantains would work too. Yeah, I know. What I would say with the banana, eat the banana how you enjoy it. Yeah. You know, it's probably more important. But I thought that was interesting. Same with the oats, that the steel cut has more of that starch to get down to the lower part of the gut. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you know, if you don't cook your vegetables as much, then there's going to be a little more work for your gut to do on them too. Yeah. For roasting vegetables, I think I tend to, it depends how big of a hurry I am, 375 unless I'm really in what my family calls master blaster, like when I'm in a hurry, and I'm just like, oh. Then I'll do like 425 and throw it in there, you know, if I'm in a rush. But 375 I think works nicely for roasting vegetables.
Good with olive oil in it.
Yeah, yeah, and then the onions and the garlic and the, yeah. And then I go down the street and I pick rosemary out of the neighbor's yard. You know, all of that's really kind of fun to do too.
Garden.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Well, how much beneficial to use sprouted grains or seeds or whatever now?
Yeah.
What is the benefit?
A little bit higher in protein when they're sprouted, like the grains and things, like if you buy a sprouted grain or bread or something, for instance. In some cases, there's more nutrients in the sprouted food too. The vegetable sprouts are one that I'm slightly cautious about though, just because whenever you look at outbreaks of foodborne illness, it's always sprouts for some reason. So just make sure that you're getting either sprouting things yourself or getting them from somewhere that you feel comfortable that they have, you know, good techniques for doing things. Somebody was talking about, 30 years ago I had a sprout jar. When you're talking about, you know, I had my sprout jar on my windowsill, and we would sprout everything with this, the little screen on top, and you take the mason jars. So, you know, that's kind of fun to do too. It just takes a couple days, and you can sprout really anything. Yeah.
But it's like sprouted sunflower seeds rather than the plain.
Yeah, I think they're a little bit higher in protein is what I'm guessing. Yeah. Great questions. So if there's do fill out the evals, because we really look at them. And then if there's other topics or things that you want us to do, we look at that too. We're always looking for new topics to kind of, because it's fun for us to kind of dig into something a little bit more too. Thank you all very much. You guys are great. Thank you.
Thank you.